The first time Noah saw Lily, it was late September, the kind of afternoon when summer still lingers in the air, but autumn has already begun to whisper its arrival. The school courtyard was loud with voices, backpacks, unfinished conversations from the summer break. Yet somehow everything softened when he noticed her standing near the old oak tree. Sunlight caught in her hair as she laughed at something a friend had said. He did not understand what he was feeling then, only that the world, which had always seemed predictable and contained, suddenly expanded in a way that made his chest feel both lighter and impossibly tight. It was not dramatic, not cinematic, not thunder striking the earth. It was quiet, subtle, a shift so gentle that no one else could have noticed. But for Noah, that moment marked the beginning of something that would reshape the way he understood himself, vulnerability, and the fragile, luminous intensity of loving someone for the very first time. At 16, love does not arrive with wisdom. It arrives with confusion, with overthinking, with glances held a second too long and words rehearsed silently before being spoken aloud. Noah began noticing everything about Lily. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the soft seriousness in her expression when teachers spoke, the way her laughter seemed to dissolve tension in any room. He found himself rearranging his route between classes just to pass her locker, pretending coincidence when in reality every movement was deliberate. He did not yet understand that first love is not about possession or certainty. It is about awakening. The sudden awareness that another human being can influence your heartbeat, your thoughts, even your perception of time. Days that included her presence felt fuller, brighter. Days when she was absent felt slightly hollow, as though something essential had been misplaced. Their first real conversation happened by accident. A shared assignment, a missing textbook, a moment of mutual frustration that turned into unexpected laughter. They sat across from each other in the library, afternoon lights spilling across wooden tables, speaking hesitantly at first, and then more freely, discovering small overlaps in taste, favorite songs, books half finished, quiet dreams not often spoken aloud. Noah felt a trembling awareness in his chest, not fear exactly, but the fragile recognition that something meaningful was forming. Lily's voice was softer up close, thoughtful, occasionally uncertain, and he sensed in her the same vulnerability he carried within himself. It was not the dramatic beginning of a romance. It was the gradual lowering of walls, the careful testing of trust. And in those shared hours between dusty shelves and fading sunlight, Noah began to understand that love does not always begin with fireworks. Sometimes it begins with curiosity and the courage to stay. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened into something neither of them named aloud. They walked home together after school, conversations drifting from trivial gossip to quiet confessions about fears, expectations, and the pressure of growing up too quickly. Noah found himself speaking more honestly than he ever had before, revealing insecurities he usually hid behind humor. Lily listened with attentiveness that felt rare and grounding, as though his thoughts were not burdens but gifts worth holding. In her presence, he felt seen, not in a superficial way, but in the deeper sense of being understood without needing to perform strength or certainty. First love often feels fragile because it is built from vulnerability rather than experience, and yet that fragility is what gives it its intensity. Each shared glance, each accidental brush of hands, each moment of silence filled with unspoken emotion carried a weight disproportionate to its simplicity. The evening he realized he was truly in love arrived without warning. They were sitting on a quiet hill overlooking the city, watching lights flicker on one by one as the sky turned from gold to indigo. Lily was speaking about her dreams of leaving one day, of exploring places beyond the familiar streets they had known since childhood, and Noah felt both admiration and a quiet ache at the thought of distance. It was in that ache that he recognized love, not as possession, but as the desire for someone's happiness even when it frightens you. He understood then that first love is not merely excitement or attraction. It is the willingness to care deeply, to risk emotional exposure, to allow another person's dreams to matter as much as your own. Sitting beside her in the cooling evening air, he realized that his world had irrevocably changed, not because he had gained something, but because he had opened himself to feeling fully for the first time. After that evening on the hill, something subtle but undeniable shifted between Noah and Lily. It wasn't announced, wasn't confessed, wasn't even directly acknowledged, but it lived in the space between their words, in the way their eyes lingered just a fraction longer, in the way silence no longer felt empty but charged with meaning. Noah began to experience time differently. Days with her felt accelerated, slipping through his fingers like sunlight through leaves, while nights stretched endlessly as he replayed conversations in his mind, analyzing each smile, each pause, each accidental touch. First love has a way of magnifying ordinary moments into sacred memories, and Noah found himself storing everything. The sound of her laughter carried by the wind, the softness in her voice when she spoke about her childhood, the slight crease between her brows when she worried about exams or expectations. He had never before realized how deeply another person could inhabit his thoughts without permission, without effort, simply by existing. It frightened him sometimes, this intensity, this vulnerability, but it also awakened something profoundly human within him, the awareness that to love is to risk being changed. Their first almost confession happened on a rainy afternoon when they found themselves sheltering under the narrow awning of a closed bookstore, the sky pouring down in steady sheets, the world temporarily reduced to the small space they shared. They were laughing about something insignificant when their eyes met and held, and in that suspended second, words hovered unspoken between them. Noah felt his pulse in his throat, his palms warm despite the cold air, every instinct urging him to bridge the fragile distance. But fear, gentle, adolescent, deeply human fear, held him still. Not fear of rejection alone, but fear of altering something delicate and precious. First love is often a balancing act between longing and preservation. You want to move forward, but you also want to protect the fragile magic of what already exists. Lily looked away first, a faint flush coloring her cheeks, and the moment dissolved into nervous laughter. Yet something had been revealed, not through speech, but through shared hesitation. And sometimes, what remains unspoken carries more truth than any declaration could. As autumn deepened, so did their connection. Leaves fell in quiet spirals around them as they walked home after school, their conversations expanding beyond surface-level exchanges into territories neither had explored with anyone else. Noah spoke of his insecurities, the pressure to succeed, the fear of disappointing his family, the uncertainty about who he was becoming. Lily responded not with solutions, but with understanding, offering her own doubts in return. The fear of leaving home, the conflict between ambition and attachment, the quiet loneliness she sometimes felt even in crowded rooms. In sharing these hidden parts of themselves, they were constructing something far more enduring than infatuation. They were building trust. Noah began to understand that first love is not merely about intensity. It is about recognition. It is about seeing another person in their vulnerability and choosing to remain. In Lily's presence, he felt less alone in his confusion about the future, less pressured to appear certain or strong. Love, he was discovering, was not about perfection. It was about permission to be unfinished. The first time their hands intertwined intentionally, it felt monumental. They were crossing a quiet street at dusk, the sky painted in muted shades of lavender and gray, when Lily reached for him. Not dramatically, not hesitantly, but naturally, as though it had always been meant to happen. The warmth of her hand and his sent a quiet tremor through his entire body, not overwhelming, but grounding. It was astonishing how something so simple could carry so much meaning. Noah realized then that first love heightens every sensation. The brush of fingers, the shared glance, the closeness of breath, because it is new, uncharted, and fragile. Walking side by side, hands connected, he felt a profound mixture of exhilaration and calm. It wasn't fireworks, it was alignment. A quiet confirmation that what had been growing silently between them had finally crossed into the physical world. And yet, even in that closeness, he sensed the delicate nature of it all, how easily misunderstandings, insecurities, or time itself could reshape what felt so certain in that moment. The night Noah finally said the words came unexpectedly. They were sitting on the same hill where he had first realized his feelings, the city glowing softly below, winter's chill just beginning to edge into the air. They had been quiet for a long time, both aware that something needed to be spoken. Noah felt the familiar tension in his chest, the fragile courage required to step into vulnerability without guarantee. First love demands bravery not because it is dramatic, but because it is honest. When he finally whispered, "I think I'm in love with you," his voice trembled not with uncertainty, but with sincerity. There was no performance, no rehearsed speech, just truth laid bare. Lily looked at him, eyes reflecting both surprise and recognition, and after a breath that felt endless, she admitted she had felt the same for weeks. The world did not explode. The sky did not shift. But something inside Noah settled into place. For the first time, he understood that love is not validated by spectacle, but by mutual courage. Two hearts choosing to reveal themselves and remain. Love began to change the way Noah understood silence. Before Lily, silence had simply been the absence of sound. Empty, sometimes awkward, sometimes forgettable. But with her, silence carried meaning. When they sat together on the bus after school, shoulders barely touching, not speaking yet feeling entirely connected, he understood that intimacy was not built only through words. It was built through comfort, through the ability to exist beside someone without performing, without filling every pause out of fear. He noticed the rhythm of her breathing, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her notebook when she was thinking, the softness in her gaze when she believed he wasn't looking. And in those quiet shared spaces, he felt something stronger than excitement. He felt safety. First love often begins with intensity, but it deepens through stillness. And Noah, who had always feared being truly seen, began to realize that Lily saw him not as he pretended to be, but as he truly was, uncertain, hopeful, fragile, human. But first love is never untouched by insecurity. As their connection grew, so did Noah's quiet fears. He began to question whether he was enough to hold her attention, enough to deserve her honesty, enough to remain in her future. When he saw her laughing with other boys, something unfamiliar twisted inside his chest. It wasn't anger, not truly. It was vulnerability, the realization that he cared deeply enough to be afraid of losing her. And he hated that feeling at first. He wanted to be mature, calm, unshaken. Yet first love does not allow emotional shortcuts. It forces confrontation with your own insecurities. Instead of withdrawing, he chose something harder, honesty. One evening, voice slightly unsteady, he admitted to Lily that sometimes he felt scared, not of her, but of how much she mattered to him. He expected her to dismiss it or laugh softly at his sensitivity. Instead, she listened carefully and confessed that she felt similar fears, that she, too, had never allowed someone this close before. And in that exchange of vulnerability, their connection strengthened. Not because they eliminated fear, but because they faced it together. Winter arrived quietly, carrying with it shorter days and longer evenings. The world outside seemed colder, but somehow their connection felt warmer, more defined. They spent afternoons studying at her kitchen table, occasionally distracted by music playing softly in the background. They shared stories from childhood, embarrassing memories, family traditions, hidden disappointments. With each confession, another invisible layer dissolved between them. Noah began to understand that first love is not only about romantic gestures. It is about gradual revelation. It is about discovering the landscapes of another person's history and realizing that loving them means accepting every part of that terrain, the light and the shadow alike. One night, as snow fell outside her window, Lily rested her head gently against his shoulder. The gesture was small, almost hesitant, but it carried a quiet weight that made his heart race. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply allowed the moment to exist, fragile, beautiful, unforgettable. Their first kiss did not happen in dramatic fashion. There were no fireworks, no perfectly scripted timing. It happened after a small disagreement, a misunderstanding that left both of them quieter than usual. They stood beneath a street lamp, the air sharp with winter cold, words lingering unspoken between them. Noah feared that perhaps he had ruined something fragile, that perhaps first love could shatter more easily than it forms. But Lily stepped closer instead of away. She searched his eyes as if looking for something steady there. And when she kissed him, softly and uncertainly, it felt less like an explosion and more like recognition, as though both of them had been slowly walking toward that moment for months. It was imperfect, slightly awkward, breathless, but it was real. And afterward, as they both laughed nervously, Noah realized that first love is not about flawless moments. It is about shared courage. Yet even as happiness deepened, time continued moving forward with quiet inevitability. Graduation loomed in the distance, conversations about universities becoming more frequent. Lily spoke of opportunities in other cities, her voice filled with excitement that Noah genuinely admired. But beneath his support lay a growing ache, the awareness that first love exists within a specific season of life. He began to understand that loving someone does not guarantee permanence. It guarantees transformation, whether they stayed together or not. He would never again be the boy who had stood beneath the oak tree that September afternoon, unaware of how profoundly another person could change him. First love had already carved something permanent into him, a new capacity for vulnerability, for empathy, for depth. And even as uncertainty hovered on the horizon, he chose not to let fear overshadow what they had. Because first love teaches you something essential, that the beauty of a moment does not depend on its duration. The closer graduation came, the more time seemed to split into two realities: the present, where everything still felt warm and certain, and the future, which loomed quietly with unanswered questions. Noah began noticing how often Lily spoke about the university she dreamed of attending, how her eyes lit up when she described new cities, new people, new possibilities. He loved that about her, her ambition, her hunger for experience, her refusal to shrink her dreams for comfort. And yet, beneath his admiration, something fragile trembled. He wondered where he fit in that expanding horizon. First love, he was learning, does not shield you from fear, it intensifies it. The more deeply you care, the more acutely you feel the possibility of change. Still, he never asked her to choose differently. He never asked her to stay smaller for his sake. Because loving someone, especially for the first time, teaches you that real love does not cage. It supports, even when supporting feels like standing at the edge of your own uncertainty. The night they received their acceptance letters, they sat together on the floor of Lily's bedroom, envelopes torn open, futures suddenly tangible. She had been accepted into the university 3 hours away, not impossibly far, but far enough to redefine daily closeness. Noah was staying in their hometown for at least another year. The difference felt subtle at first, then immense. They smiled, celebrated, held each other. But beneath the excitement lived an unspoken awareness that something fundamental was shifting. First love often collides with first independence. It asks two young hearts to balance personal growth with shared attachment, and not always gracefully. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, Lily admitted she was scared. Not of leaving, but of what distance might do to them. Noah felt the same fear rise in his throat, but instead of promising unrealistic certainty, he did something braver. He told her the truth, that he didn't know what would happen, but he wanted to try. And in that honesty, their love deepened, not as a fantasy, but as a choice. The summer before her departure became both beautiful and heavy. Every moment felt heightened by awareness. Sunsets lasted longer. Laughter felt sharper. Even arguments carried weight, because time was no longer abstract. They found themselves memorizing small things unconsciously. The way the other smelled after swimming, the pattern of freckles on sun-warmed skin, the cadence of familiar footsteps. First love, when threatened by change, becomes almost sacred. Noah began to understand that love is not only about possession or proximity, it is about presence. So he stayed present. He did not withdraw to protect himself. He did not grow distant out of preemptive heartbreak. He leaned in. He held her longer. He listened more carefully. And somewhere in that intentional closeness, he learned something that would stay with him long after. That loving fully, even when the future is uncertain, is braver than loving cautiously. The day she left arrived with unbearable normalcy. The sky was clear. The air was warm. Birds moved through the trees as though nothing monumental was happening. They stood beside her packed car, surrounded by suitcases and parental instructions, and suddenly all the practiced strength felt fragile. Noah had imagined this moment many times, rehearsed being composed, supportive, mature. But when Lily stepped into his arms, the reality of distance settled heavily between them. She whispered that she loved him. He whispered it back, and the words felt deeper now, less about excitement, more about commitment. First love matures quickly when tested. It sheds its innocence and reveals whether it can withstand reality. As her car disappeared down the street, Noah stood still for a long time. He felt both proud and hollow. And for the first time, he understood that love can exist even in absence, but it requires patience, trust, and the willingness to endure longing. Distance did not break them immediately. In fact, at first, it strengthened them. Late-night phone calls replaced evening walks. Text messages filled the spaces where physical closeness once lived. They described new experiences to each other, her dorm room, his part-time job, the different rhythms of their days. There was effort in it, intentionality. But slowly, subtly, something began to change. Not in their feelings, but in their growth. They were evolving separately now, shaped by environments the other could not fully witness. Conversations sometimes lagged. Silence sometimes stretched longer than before. And Noah began to realize that first love is not defined by whether it lasts forever. It is defined by how deeply it transforms you. He could feel himself becoming more independent, more aware, more emotionally grounded, because loving her had taught him how. Whether their paths would continue side by side or gradually diverge, he understood something profound. First love does not disappear. It becomes part of who you are. As autumn returned for the second time since they had first met beneath the oak tree, Noah began to notice the subtle shift that neither of them had wanted to name. Their calls were still kind, still affectionate, but no longer effortless. There were pauses now, not comfortable silences, but gaps filled with unspoken thoughts. Lily spoke about new friends, late-night study sessions, spontaneous trips with classmates. Noah listened carefully, genuinely happy for her, yet quietly aware that her world was expanding in ways that no longer included him at the center. And that realization hurt in a way that was difficult to articulate. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't neglect. It was growth. First love often begins in shared discovery, but it is tested when two people begin discovering themselves separately. Noah felt pride and ache coexist within him. pride that she was becoming who she dreamed of being, an ache that he was no longer witnessing each transformation firsthand. He began to understand that love is not always about losing someone suddenly. Sometimes it is about gradually releasing the version of them you once knew. The first real argument since her departure happened over something trivial. A missed call, a misunderstood message, a tone interpreted incorrectly. But beneath the surface irritation lay something deeper: fear. Noah feared becoming less essential. Lily feared being held back. Neither accusation was spoken aloud, but both were felt. First love has a way of exposing emotional immaturity, not cruelly, but honestly. They were no longer two teenagers walking the same streets every afternoon. They were becoming adults, shaped by different pressures, responsibilities, and perspectives. That night, after the argument ended awkwardly, Noah lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing that loving someone also means accepting that they will change, and that you may change in ways they cannot fully follow. The pain was not dramatic, but steady. It felt like watching a tide slowly recede, unsure if it would return. When they met in person during winter break, everything felt both familiar and unfamiliar. She stepped off the train, and for a moment it was as though no time had passed. The way she smiled, the way she said his name, the way her hand found his instinctively. But as the hours unfolded, Noah sensed subtle differences. New expressions, new stories, new mannerisms shaped by experiences he had not shared. And he knew she likely saw changes in him too. They were no longer the same two people who had sat on that hill months ago whispering first confessions. They had grown. And growth, while beautiful, sometimes creates quiet distance. Yet there was still tenderness between them, still affection, still a shared history that no one else could claim. That evening, as they walked through familiar streets dusted with snow, Noah felt something bittersweet settle inside him. First love does not disappear abruptly. It transforms, reshapes, sometimes softens into something quieter, but no less meaningful. The conversation they had both been avoiding finally arrived on a gray afternoon. They sat facing each other in a quiet cafe, hands wrapped around cooling cups of coffee, eyes heavy with understanding. No accusations were exchanged, no dramatic declarations made. Instead, there was honesty, gentle, painful, necessary honesty. Lily admitted she felt pulled in many directions, that she was discovering parts of herself she had never known before. Noah admitted he felt proud of her, but also increasingly uncertain about where they fit in each other's futures. They did not fall out of love in that moment. That would have been easier. Instead, they acknowledged that love alone is not always enough to hold two evolving lives in perfect alignment. And in that realization, there was maturity far beyond their years. First love sometimes ends not because it was insufficient, but because it accomplished its purpose. It taught them how to love, how to open, how to grow. When they said goodbye that day, it was softer than anyone might expect. No slammed doors, no raised voices. Just two young people holding each other a little longer than usual, memorizing the weight of something that had once felt infinite. Noah felt tears rise, but they were not only tears of loss. They were tears of gratitude. Because loving Lily had changed him irrevocably. She had taught him courage, the courage to confess feelings, to face jealousy honestly, to endure distance, to release with dignity. As he walked home alone, the world did not feel empty. It felt altered, quieter, reflective. He realized that first love does not fail when it ends. It fulfills something essential within you. It carves depth into your heart. It teaches you that vulnerability is not weakness. And though the chapter had closed, the imprint remained, permanent, formative, tender. The weeks after their goodbye were not dramatic, but they were heavy in subtle ways. Noah expected devastation, expected sleepless nights, and overwhelming sorrow. Instead, what he felt was quieter, a steady ache that accompanied him through ordinary routines. He still walked past the oak tree in the courtyard. He still passed the hill overlooking the city. But now those places felt layered, as though they contained echoes only he could hear. First love does not vanish when it ends. It lingers in spaces, in habits, in the way your mind instinctively reaches for someone who is no longer there. And yet, beneath the sadness, something surprising began to form: clarity. Without constant communication, without daily anticipation, Noah began to notice himself more. His own thoughts, his own desires, his own fears, separate from hers. Loving Lily had opened him. Losing her, gently, respectfully, forced him to stand alone in that openness. And that solitude, though uncomfortable, began shaping him into someone steadier. Time, as it always does, continued moving forward without asking permission. Months passed. Seasons shifted again. The sharpness of missing her softened into something reflective rather than painful. He no longer checked his phone hoping for her name. He no longer replayed their last conversation, searching for hidden meanings. Instead, he began remembering her with gratitude instead of longing. First love often becomes a quiet foundation rather than a lingering wound. Noah started noticing how much braver he had become in other areas of his life. He spoke more honestly with friends. He took creative risks he once avoided. He allowed himself to feel disappointment without shutting down. Loving her had expanded his emotional range. And even though they were no longer together, the growth remained. He realized that some relationships are not meant to last forever. They are meant to awaken you. Occasionally, memories returned unexpectedly. The sound of her laughter in a passing voice. The smell of rain that reminded him of that afternoon beneath the bookstore awning. The warmth of early autumn air that brought him back to the first time he saw her beneath the oak tree. But these memories no longer destabilized him. They felt like chapters in a book he had already read, familiar, meaningful, complete. First love becomes part of your internal architecture. It shapes how you approach the next connection, how you handle conflict, how you express care. Noah noticed that he no longer feared vulnerability the way he once had. The worst had happened. He had loved deeply and survived the ending. That realization gave him quiet confidence. He understood now that heartbreak is not destruction. It is expansion. It stretches the heart so it can hold more in the future. Years later, when Noah found himself sitting across from someone new, someone kind, intelligent, curious, he noticed the difference in himself immediately. He did not rush. He did not build fantasies too quickly. He did not mistake intensity for permanence. First love had taught him patience. It had taught him that real connection grows slowly, through attention and honesty. And as he listened to this new person speak, he felt gratitude for Lily. Not because he wanted her back, but because she had been the one who first taught him how to open his heart. Without her, he might have remained guarded, hesitant, emotionally distant. Instead, he approached love now with both courage and balance. First love had not been practice. It had been initiation. One evening, while visiting his hometown, Noah walked past the oak tree again. It stood unchanged, roots deep, branches stretching confidently into the sky. He paused there, remembering the boy he had been, uncertain, observant, unaware of how profoundly one encounter could alter him. He smiled softly, not with regret, not with longing, but with appreciation. First love is rarely the love that stays forever, but it is often the love that shapes forever. It teaches you that your heart is capable of depth, that vulnerability is survivable, that joy and pain can coexist without canceling each other out. As Noah continued walking, he realized something simple and powerful. Lily had not just been someone he loved. She had been the beginning of who he would become. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that carries no warning. Noah had returned to his hometown for a short visit, walking familiar streets with the calm detachment of someone who no longer belonged entirely to the past. He stepped into a small cafe he used to frequent during his school years, mostly out of nostalgia rather than intention. And then he heard it. A laugh. Soft. Familiar. Not identical to the one in his memories. More grounded now. Slightly lower, but unmistakable. His body recognized it before his mind allowed confirmation. He turned slowly, and there she was, Lily, sitting by the window, sunlight brushing against her hair just as it had years ago. For a split second, time folded in on itself. The present and the past overlapped so seamlessly that he felt both 18 and fully grown at once. She looked up. Their eyes met. And instead of shock, instead of pain, there was recognition. Calm recognition. They did not rush toward each other. They did not freeze dramatically. Instead, they smiled, the kind of smile reserved for someone who once knew you intimately. She stood first. "Noah?" she asked, as if confirming something beautiful but improbable. He nodded, stepping closer. And when they embraced, it was different from how they used to hold each other. There was warmth, but no desperation. Familiarity, but no possession. Years had softened the sharp edges of who they had been. They sat together, awkwardness flickering briefly before dissolving into genuine conversation. They spoke about cities, careers, small failures, unexpected triumphs. About how life had unfolded in ways neither of them could have predicted. And beneath every exchanged sentence, there was an unspoken understanding. They were no longer the people who had once said goodbye under a fading sky. As they talked, Noah noticed something unexpected. The intensity he once associated with her was gone, replaced by steadiness. He no longer felt the nervous electricity of first love. No overwhelming urgency. No fear of losing her with every passing second. Instead, he felt peace. Lily seemed different too, more certain of herself, more grounded. And in that maturity, he realized something quietly profound. Sometimes two people meet at the right time to awaken each other, but not at the right time to stay together. Their younger selves had needed that love, needed the emotional awakening, the vulnerability, the courage it demanded. But now, sitting across from her as adults shaped by separate journeys, there was no unfinished business, only appreciation. First love had done its work. At one point, Lily looked at him thoughtfully and said, "You know, I used to wonder what would have happened if we had tried harder." There was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. Noah considered the question carefully. Years ago, it would have ignited longing or regret. Now, it felt like a gentle thought experiment. "We probably would have forced something that needed space," he replied honestly. "And maybe we wouldn't have become who we are now." She nodded slowly. And in that nod, there was closure, not dramatic, not tearful, but mature. They both understood that love is not only measured by duration. Some relationships last forever. Others last exactly as long as they are meant to. And forcing permanence does not make something more meaningful. It only changes its nature. When they finally stepped outside the cafe, evening lights stretched across the street in long golden lines. They stood facing each other, no longer teenagers standing beneath an oak tree, but adults shaped by time. There was no grand declaration, no attempt to rewrite history, just gratitude. "I'm glad we met back then," Lily said softly. "Me too," Noah replied, and he meant it in a way that felt complete. As they parted, walking in opposite directions without heaviness, Noah realized something that once would have terrified him. He could love her deeply once, and still let her remain part of his past. First love had not been a promise of forever. It had been a doorway. And now, years later, he could step through that memory without being pulled back by it. That night, lying awake in his childhood bedroom, Noah stared at the ceiling and replayed the encounter in the cafe. But unlike years ago, he was not analyzing every word, not searching for hidden signals. There was no ache pressing against his ribs, only reflection. Seeing Lily again had not reopened a wound. It had shown him how fully it had healed. First love, he realized, is not meant to be erased. It becomes a reference point, a reminder of who you were before you understood your own emotional depth. He thought about the boy who once stood trembling beneath an oak tree, terrified of confessing his feelings. That boy had believed love was something fragile and easily lost. The man lying in the quiet room now understood something different. Love is transformative. Even when it ends, it leaves behind strength. In the weeks that followed, Noah felt lighter. Not because Lily had returned to his life. She hadn't. They exchanged a brief message afterward, a simple acknowledgement of how good it was to see each other, and then the conversation naturally faded. But there was no emptiness attached to it. Instead, he felt alignment, as though a chapter that had quietly remained open in his heart had finally been closed with care. He began noticing the way he approached new connections, with patience, with presence, without the desperation of youth. First love had taught him intensity. Time had taught him balance. And together, those lessons created something steady. He no longer feared loving deeply. He no longer feared endings either, because he now understood that endings do not erase meaning. One evening, months later, Noah found himself sitting across from someone new again. Her name was different. Her laugh was different. Her energy carried a warmth that did not mirror the past. It created something entirely its own. As he listened to her speak, he felt something unfamiliar yet peaceful: readiness. Not the overwhelming rush of first love, not the dizzying obsession of youthful attachment, but a grounded desire to build something slowly, honestly. He realized that first love had been about discovery, discovering what it means to feel seen, to feel chosen, to feel vulnerable. This new possibility felt different. It was about partnership, about shared direction, about choosing each other not out of urgency, but out of clarity. Later that night, walking home beneath a sky scattered with quiet stars, Noah understood the full weight of what first love had given him. It had taught him how to open. It had taught him how to lose. It had taught him that heartbreak does not destroy you, it expands you. Without Lily, he might have remained guarded. Without their ending, he might have mistaken attachment for destiny. But because of that early, tender chapter of his life, he now loved with intention instead of fear. First love is not a rehearsal. It is not a mistake. It is not something to outgrow or dismiss. It is the foundation upon which emotional maturity is built. And foundations are not meant to be lived in forever. They are meant to support what comes next. Years from now, Noah would still remember her. Not with longing, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude. First love is rarely about forever with one person. It is about forever within yourself. The moment you realize your heart is capable of depth, courage, and transformation. As he stepped forward into a future that no longer felt uncertain, Noah carried that knowledge gently within him. Lily had been the beginning, not the destination. And sometimes, the beginning is the most important part of all, because it teaches you how to love, and more importantly, how to keep loving, even after you've learned how to let go.